one is the first, but we plan on doing these every other month. So feel free if there are any topics or solutions in general within Planon that you would love just to learn more about or have more training. Feel free to reach out to me or your account manager, and then we'd be happy to include that in the schedule for the future. So I am recording today's session. So I know we have time today for 2 hours. If forever, you need to walk away, grab coffee or something like that, it's okay. I will be basically storing the recording in our North America Teams channel, and I'll include the link in the chat in just a second. So you'll be able to access the recording from today in addition to a quick guide that's available to anyone to use for all the topics we're covering today. So your trainers are going to walk us through, hopefully there's some familiar faces for you. So Nelson will be leading majority of the training. And I'll go through the agenda in a second. And then Manaz was wonderful in terms of putting together this quick guide for you all to utilize in the future, and really we've gotten some feedback that sometimes the web help or the user guides aren't as helpful as we would like. So we're hoping that this quick guide will really be something of use to you, and thank you, Manaz, for putting that together.
As of right now, there are no new announcements for safety.
And if you wouldn't mind just muting, just so we don't hear any background noise, that'd be great. Thank you. So in terms of the agenda for today, so Nelson will walk you through basically what are the CAD requirements, when you're bringing in new CAD drawings into Planon, what that drawing definition should look like, the drawing and floor mapping, the import definition, and then of course how to view those floor plans within Planon. And then just from our experience over the past years, kind of what are common mistakes or lessons learned we seem to see quite a few times that are helpful for you to hear. Some recent CAD improvements we've done, and then Manaz will give just a brief overview again what that quick guide looks like and how to utilize that. And then that should leave about 30 minutes for Q&A at the end. So if you wouldn't mind, just so we can ensure we cover everything today, if you wouldn't mind leaving those questions to the end of the session, those 30 minutes. And then once we open that up, we can feel free, you can either submit those via the chat or just speak up, and that's fine as well. Okay. All right. So with that, I will lead for Lucas to, for Nelson to kick off the training.
Thanks, Paula. All right, so let me share my screen. All right, welcome everyone. This will be CAD import training. I'll walk through the different steps. I'll explain the different definitions that we have, and then we'll do some imports into the application itself. This is more of a generic training, so it might not be exactly how you guys do it, per se. Like the space layers will be different, right? The AutoCAD drawing will be different and stuff like that. But I think it'll make sense for those that are doing the imports. Okay? All right. For the CAD import training, we're going to walk through some Planon CAD requirements first. So the requirements on the AutoCAD drawings for us to be able to import the drawing into Planon. Then we'll walk through like the drawing definition, the import definitions. And then once we import the drawing, we'll go and look at the space and workspace TSI, where we can see the output of the drawing, see the floor plan within the application, make sure everything looks good. And then we'll touch on some lessons learned and some CAD improvements that we have as well. Okay. So some Planon CAD requirements. In the AutoCAD drawing itself, we currently support up to AutoCAD 2025, the full version, right? We don't support 3D polylines or any dynamic blocks at the moment. But you can save we can only save compatible AutoCAD versions in the DWG formats. So we don't import like I think DWF formats, only DWGs. Okay. And the version of the Planon CAD import metadata version of the Connect for AutoCAD, if you guys use that, Connect for AutoCAD plugin, must be compatible as well to the versions, to the AutoCAD versions that we support, and the version of Planon that you are on. And you can view that within the web help. You can see that in the supported configurations guide. Okay. I'll touch on the web help a little bit later, and so I'll show you how to get to the release notes and the supported configuration guides as well. Okay. It's all online. The scaling factor of the blocks on the supported drawings must be 1. So this applies to all entities. Now we do have an enhancement that's in the application at the current moment where it says allow auto correction on the CAD imports. If you set that to yes, it will then auto scale all the blocks and entities to 1 for you. So you don't have to go in the drawing and scale them manually. Okay. Whoops. So Plan only supports certain size of your drawing. So if your drawing is like a mile long and a mile wide, then we probably cannot import it. But then you need to break up the drawings. But I think most of you have drawings that are fairly big, but not 10,000 by 10,000 square foot, right? Hopefully. All right. Drawings with more than 15,000 entities can cause some performance issues. This doesn't mean that you have to. This doesn't mean that you cannot import drawings that have 15,000 entities or more. You can, but it might impact the performance. So the more entities there are, the longer it takes the drawing to render in the Planon application. So if you scale down the entities on the drawing, the better the performance will be. So when you import the drawing, Planon will give you a warning if it exceeds the 15,000. It gives you a count of how many entities it imports into Planon. So if it's like 15,001, it will give you that warning and say, oh, it exceeds the 15,000 count, so it might impact performance, something like that. So you can clean up the drawing a little bit and then bring the element counts down. Okay. Go next. Okay, so for the layer naming conventions, if they're all consistent, and then consistent meaning also case sensitive as well, like for example, the space polylines or the space numbers and stuff like that, right? If they're all consistent, then you can use a drawing template to import your drawings, right? So what a drawing template is that you have an AutoCAD file and you put all the layers that you're going to use for all your floors in all your AutoCAD drawings onto that template, onto that AutoCAD file. And then when you create the drawing definition, when we're going to walk through an exercise of that, you just map the layers that you're going to import for all your drawings, right? But the consistency needs to be that all the space polyline layers need to be the same, need to be on the same layer for all the drawings that you have. All the space number layers need to be the same. All the workspace polylines need to be the same, and all the workspace numbers need to be the same. And the floor polyline needs to be the same for all of your drawings. And then you have your furniture, your doors, your walls, your windows and stuff. We call those construction data, right? It helps define the actual space, where the doors are, where the desks are and stuff like that, where the stairs are. So that's all construction data. And then if you have those layers, all of those different layers onto that template, we can map that template, map all the layers that we're going to bring into Planon. And that will save you some time. You can use that template and import all your drawings. If all your drawings had different layer names, like the space layer names were different, the workspace layer names were different, or the space numbers were different, right? Space number layers were different. Then you have to map each drawing before you're able to import it into Planon. And that would be more work for you because you have to create a drawing definition per floor plan, so to say, right? So then you can import the drawing itself. So we definitely recommend having a template with all the layers and then having a consistency of all your drawings with the same layer naming conventions. Okay? For the floor layers, we support up to 2 floor polylines, a net and a gross. We require 1. So you don't necessarily need 2, but we do need 1 If you do have two, one can be like the inner wall, the outer wall, and one can be the outer wall. The floor polyline itself, it has to be one complete polyline around the entire floor plan, and it needs to be closed. So only one polyline per net or per gross, right? And if you have like two, if you're doing like a roof, for example, and you have like two sections that pop out of the roof or three sections that pop out of the roof, you can use that polyline and continuously draw around those two or three sections, and then loop back and close that polyline. So it's one continuous floor polyline around those sections. Okay, so it has to be one floor polyline on its own layer per floor plan. And then for the spaces, there should be one space polyline for each space, right? Make sure there's no duplicate polylines per space. Sometimes when we draw a space polyline for a section of spaces, we draw one on top of the other by mistake. And then so there's duplicate space polylines or something like that. So we make sure there's only one space polyline per space. The space polylines, they shouldn't overlap. They shouldn't cross over into another space polyline. They can snap right on top of each other, but Planon's a little bit picky on this, where if it crosses over a little bit, it won't be able to recognize which space it belongs to, or it might give you an error message or something like that. So we try to make sure that it doesn't cross over each other. You can snap it right on top of each other, or you can leave like a small gap where you draw the inside walls of the spaces or something like that. Then that leaves a small gap between the different spaces, right? All right. The space polyline should be on its own layer. No other objects should be on that layer. The entities must be on line weight polylines or a circle or ellipse, something like that. It can't be 2D polyline. It can't be a 2D polyline. So I've seen instances where it was a 2D polyline and that particular element did not import into Planon, and you had to redo that 2D polyline to make it a polyline. In a later release, I don't remember if it's like L113, maybe something like that, the auto correction will convert that 2D polyline to a regular polyline for you automatically when you do the import, so you don't have to fix it in the AutoCAD drawing. But prior to that release, I think you have to go into the AutoCAD and update those polylines to become a polyline instead of a 2D. Okay. And then each space polyline should have a space number record. And that space number needs to be unique on that floor plan. So if you have a space 101 in the top left corner, you can't have a space 101 on the other space on that floor plan. So that space number needs to be unique. There should be one space number to each space polyline. The space number, we have a character limit of 15 characters, so it is max of 15 characters for a space number. And for the space numbers, you can use text, mtext, or a block with some attributes to identify the actual space number. If you use text, it needs to be consistent for that entire floor to be text for all the space numbers. If you use mtext, it needs to be consistent. If you use blocks, you need to use blocks for all the space numbers. The space numbers need to be on its own layer with no other elements or objects on that layer itself. And then we have to make sure that the insertion points and the grip points of the space number itself, whether it's text, mtext, or a block, needs to be within that space polyline. So it can recognize that, okay, for this particular space, here is the space number that goes with it. For like the smaller spaces, maybe like a closet or something like that, right? You have to make sure that the insertion points and the grip points fit within that smaller space. You can scale that, or you can size that space text or block down so that the insertion points fit within. When you view the floor plan within Planon, the text itself is Planon generated, so it doesn't use the text that's within the AutoCAD to display itself. Okay. Right. So we have to make sure the insertion points and the grip points of the space text or of the space number is within the the space polyline itself. Okay? And if you guys are using workspaces, same concept as spaces. However, the workspace polylines, they need to be within a space polyline. Okay, it can't be outside of a space polyline. So how the Planon application works is we have maybe like an open area space or something like that, and you can have multiple workspaces within, or you can have a one-to-one where you have a space and then you have a workspace within that space, something like that, right? But the workspace polylines, they always need to be within a space polyline itself. Okay, and you can have multiple workspaces within one space. Again, the workspace polylines, they should not cross over into other workspace polylines, right? So if you have a section of workspaces, those polylines should not cross over into another workspace. They can snap right on top of each other. But again, Planon's a little bit picky on this, right? You have to make sure it doesn't cross over. If it crosses over just a little bit, right, it'll complain about it doesn't know which workspace to map it to, which workspace number to map it to, or something like that. Okay. The workspace polylines, same as the spaces, they should be on their own layer, right? Not nothing else on that layer except for the workspace polylines. And then for the workspace numbers, again, you can use text, mtext, or a block. We just have to make sure that that text, mtext, or block, you have one workspace number for each workspace, and that workspace number needs to be unique for that floor, okay? Not for the entire property, but just for that floor. And then the workspace numbers need to be on its own layer, and then insertion points and grip points of that text, mtext, or block needs to be within that workspace polyline itself as well, for it to be, for the Planon application to be able to identify which workspace number goes with which workspace. Okay. All right. All other objects, like the doors, the walls, the furniture, we call those construction data. And you can map those, you can map the layers that you want from AutoCAD into the Planon application, and we can bring those in. You don't have to map all the layers in the AutoCAD drawing. If you didn't want to bring certain layers in, you just don't map that layer and it won't bring it into Planon. Like maybe like the grid lines or something like that, right? Or like the electrical components on the AutoCAD drawing. If you don't want the end users to see that within the Planon application, just don't map those layers and then it won't bring those in, okay? So we only map the layers that we do want to bring in to the Planon application. All right. Okay, drawing definitions. Let me go to the Planon application. Let me minimize this and go into Planon. Okay, so we have two components here, a drawing definition and an import definition. What a drawing definition is that here in the drawing definition, you define the layers of the AutoCAD drawing that you want to bring into Planon, right? So we will map, here's an AutoCAD drawing. This layer is the floor polyline. This layer is a space polyline. This is where we get this layer is the space number. And then, this is the door, the wall, the furniture and stuff like that. We map the construction data. Once we mapped the different layers, then we can import the drawing. Okay. All right, so let me go through an example here. So I have an example here where I'm mapping this particular template, right? And if I go to the business objects tab, here I have my floor business object, my space, my workspace, and then we have construction data, right? If I select the floor first, right? If I go to the details tab, I can see under my CAD business object mapping. In this particular case, I have two floor polylines, a net and a gross. We only require one, but we support up to two, okay? If you only have one, then you can map it to the net. But for the nets, for the inner wall polyline layer, we're mapping it to this particular CAD layer. So this is the layer name. For the outer wall layer, for the gross, we're mapping it to this particular layer, okay? So nothing else is on this 50 gross layer except for the outer wall, and nothing else is on this 51-net layer except for the inner wall of the floor polylines. And when we map the different layers, you can define the polyline classification, what's net and then what's gross. If you only have one, for example, then you just map it to the net. Okay. You go back, then we would map our space business object or our space table. I go to the details tab. Then our space polylines are on the 70-spaces layer for this example here. So I would map it to that. And then how do we get the space number, right? We go to the field mapping here, and then we have our space number. So in this case, our space number is on a block, right? So I would map how to get the space number. So the field for space number, and then it's going to be on the CAD layer 71-space data. And this is on a block. So I'm going to map the CAD block. The block name is called space data. And then the attribute on that block where I can get the space number from is on the attribute is called the number attribute. Okay? If it was just text, then you don't need to map the block or the attribute, right? You just map the CAD layer itself. And then you can say, okay, this is where I get all my space numbers, right? If it was on M text, then you would just map the CAD layer here saying, okay, this layer is where my space numbers are. And then down below, you have your start line and your end line for the M text itself, right? So you can put in a value of, if it starts on line 1 and ends on line 1, you would put a value of 1 and 1. If on the M text it starts on line 2 and ends on line 2, then you put a value of 2 and then ending on line 2 or something like that, right? So then here we define the actual line that it's of the M text to get the space number from. And then that means that if you are using M text, it does need to be consistent, right? If it's on line 1, then all of the first line of the M text should always be the space number itself, okay? And then in this case, we can also map other data from the AutoCAD drawing and bring that into Planon. Typically, we only map the space number. Sometimes we also map the space name. If you were to maintain some of the space data in AutoCAD, we can also map those as well, like the space type, the department or something like that. But typically, the space data itself is maintained within the Planon application because it's easier to maintain there. You don't need an AutoCAD license. Other space managers can maintain it there, and then you don't have to always open up AutoCAD to update. But in this case, I'm also mapping the space name, right? The space name is on the same block as the space number, except a different attributes. Okay, so it's still on the same block. So this is the block layer, this is the block name, and then the attribute for the space name is on this attribute here. Okay, and I'm mapping it to the name field. Okay. And if I go back and go to workspaces, go to details, again, same thing as spaces, right? But for workspaces, you would have your workspace polyline. So this is the workspace polyline itself. So I'm going to map this. And then how to get the workspace number itself. The workspace number in this case, it's on M text, right? So if I map the layer that the workspace number is on, and then the M text, for M text, it's on line 1 for the workspace number. So I'm going to start on line 1 and end on line 1. That's how I get my workspace number. Okay. And then everything else is construction data, right? If I go select this, go to details, CAD business object mappings. Here I would map my walls, my stairs, my furniture, doors, and so forth. All of the stuff I mapped as construction data. This will help help the end user visualize what type of space it is, where the doors are, where the furniture is, if it's a stair or elevator or something like that, right? So this is for helping the end user visualize it. Now, again, for construction data, you don't need to map every single layer on the AutoCAD drawing. Just map the ones that you want the end users to see, right? And you can pick and choose which layer you want to map in. Only for the layers that you map will it bring into the Planon application. For the layers that you don't map, it will not bring into the application. Okay? All right, so here I'm going to download my template so I have it. And then I'm going to create a new drawing definition and we can walk through how we create one. Okay? So I would say add on the right, click on the add action. Of this training. And then I will upload my template itself. This one here. And in this case, it's a European template, right? So I would use millimeters. Typically in the US, we would use inches as the unit of length. So what unit the AutoCAD itself was drawn in, right? You can define that here. Click on save. See the spinning circle. So now it's reading the drawing itself. So reading all the layers. So let's let that finish. And again, I'm using an AutoCAD template, right? So if I were to introduce a new building, for example, or a new site, and I wanted to add additional layers to this template, I would just download this template, open it up in AutoCAD, right? Add those layers to the template, upload the template again, and then I can map those additional layers to it. Okay, so you can just modify the template itself and then go ahead and import all your drawings. That is if all your AutoCAD drawings are consistent. Now, if all your AutoCAD drawings were not consistent, like the space polylines were all on different layers for each of the drawings, right? Then you would have to map a drawing. You have to create a drawing definition per floor. Okay, then that'll be a little bit more work. Okay, now that I've uploaded my template, if I were to make changes to this template and add more layers to it, right, I would upload it again and I would say refresh drawing structure. That would then, the application will then read the AutoCAD drawing again and then read all the layers that are on the template, okay? Now, if I go to Business Objects tab, I would usually start with the floor business object here. So I'm going to add the floor business object, then go to the Details tab. And then here, again, you have to have one floor polyline, right? So a net is required. So if I choose the layer from AutoCAD, and when I open up this, when I click on this pick list to choose the layer from the AutoCAD drawing, these are all the layers that it read from the AutoCAD drawing. You'll see like duplicates, right? You'll see like a layer that starts with, let's do fixed, something like this. You'll see a layer that has the asterisk in front, and you'll see the actual layer name itself like this, right? The one with the asterisk is so we can support XREF drawings. So if you had an XREF drawing, on the XREF, the layer name is always prefixed with the file name itself, right? This will make the layer itself always unique per XREF drawing, per floor plan, right? And then this won't allow you to have a template for all your drawings. So we introduced a layer naming in the CAD drawing definition itself. We put an asterisk in front, right? So that you don't have to map each layer individually if it's an XREF, because all the XREF layers are unique. So if you put an asterisk, it's like a wild card. So then you can still use a template even though you have XREF drawings. Okay? So then if this particular layer was on the XREF drawing itself, technically you'll see like the file name and then I think the pipe symbol and then the actual layer name, something like that, right? So in this case, if you were to map the XREF layers, you can use the asterisk itself. Okay. So for this one, I'm mapping the floor layer. So I would choose the actual layer itself. I think it was like 51 nets, something like that. So that's the inner wall. And then when I choose this layer, by default, it brings in the color from the AutoCAD drawing. Okay. Now, you can choose to use that color, or if you click on this pick list, you can define a different color for this particular layer itself. Okay. So you can change the color if you want. So you don't have to use the color from the AutoCAD drawing. And then I also have an exterior floor polyline. So I'm going to add, or you can copy an existing. If you copy it, then you can just modify it. So this one would be 50 gross. That's the exterior wall layer. And then the polyline classification would be gross here. And again, it took the AutoCAD color from the AutoCAD drawing itself. And again, you can always come back and change or pick or choose a different color if you want. And then click on save. Okay. So that's for the floor. Then I would add the space business object here, go to details. And again, by default, you always need a space number, right? So the space number, space polyline is on, looking at my cheat sheet here to see which layer the space polyline is on. The space polyline is on 70 spaces. So I'm going to select that. And again, it takes in the AutoCAD color. I'll leave that for now. Save it. And then for spaces, we need to map the space number. So you would go to the field mapping selection step here, right? Select the record here, and we always need a space number. So a space number is default. So in this case, my space number is on a block. So I would select the layer that it's on. It's on the space data layer. That's what the layer the block is on. And then the block name itself, I think it's called space data. Let's search for it. This one here, space data. And then the attribute on that block for the number itself is on the number attribute, right? So I can map that there and then click on save. So that's how I get my number. And then for the name, so I can also bring in the name as well, because I have on the block different attributes, and then the name is one of the attributes as well, right? So it's on the same block, but a different attribute for the name. So I can add a new, or I can just copy this one. I'll change this to space name, change the field mapping. I want to map this to the space name field. And then the attribute that we're looking for this value on is on the name attribute. And then the layer and the block is the same because it's on the same block. And then I can save that. Okay, so I'm done with my space layer mappings, right? I can go back to the CAD Business Objects tab. I would say add here, and then link workspaces. Save this. So when I link a workspace, I always need to choose a user-defined type. And it should always be the workspace itself. And then I would go to the Details tab. And then for the workspace layer is on the 78 fixed workspace layer, I think. This one here. So this is my workspace layer. And again, it takes in the AutoCAD color, and you can always change that if you want to, right? Change it to something else. Click on save. And then in the field mapping, how do I get my workspace number from the AutoCAD drawing? And my workspace number is on mText, I believe. So the layer that the workspace number is on this layer here. And it's mText, so it's on line 1. So I would say starts on line 1, ends on line 1. Click on save. And then that's how I get my workspace number. Okay. Go back to the CAD Business Objects tab and then add construction data. So everything else would be construction data. All your doors, walls, furnitures, and stuff like that. So I would go to details, CAD Business Object Mappings. I'm going to add a building element layer here. And then select my layer. And then again, if you had XREF layers, right, you can choose the one with the asterisk. If they were not XREF, then you don't have to choose the one with the asterisk. When you open up this layer pick list, you can see which layer is activated on the AutoCAD drawing itself, right? So you can activate on the AutoCAD drawing all the layers that you want to map within the map into the Planon application. And then when you open up this layer pick list, it will have that check mark saying this layer was active on the AutoCAD drawing. So then you can, pick all the active ones or something like that. So we do have to map each individual layer one at a time, right? So it does make sense to have a CAD's template. So you only have to do this once, and then you can always update it if you introduce new layers. But if your drawings were not consistent and they all had different layer names on each drawing, then you would have to do this for each drawing. You would have to create a drawing definition for each drawing. This is very time consuming, right? Especially if you have a lot of construction data layers, okay? So here I would just copy an existing one and then go to the next one where I have the check mark. And let me just pick a couple here. And you do have to do this one at a time. So that's why it is time consuming. That's why we recommend the template itself and making your drawing layers consistent. So I'm just gonna pick some here. And you can see here as I pick them, it takes in the AutoCAD colors here, right? And you can always change that at the end or something like that. That's Let me just do a couple more, like the window frames or something like that. Yeah. And then one of these. Okay. How I mapped this was I just did a selected one. I did a copy. When you do a copy, and then when you click on the pick list, it goes to that layer itself, and you can always just pick the next one and then click on save, something like that, right? Then you would have you can just keep going down the list if you have a lot, right? In this case, I mapped two of the same layers, right? So say I hit copy by accident and I didn't change it or something like that. So I mapped the layer twice, right? If you map a layer twice or if you leave one blank, so let me add a building element here and save it. So I have one that's mapped twice and I have one that's blank, right? When you try to save this drawing definition or when you try to complete this drawing definition, so I'm going back to the CAD drawing definitions tab and say, okay, I'm done mapping my AutoCAD drawing or my template, right? I can complete this. So when I click on complete, it's going to give me an error message saying, oh, this layer here, the number 35 was mapped, has more than one mapping. This is not allowed. And then I have a layer that's not from the building element that is not mapped to a CAD layer itself, right? So it would give you that error message if something is blank or if something is mapped twice or more than once, right? And I can go back here, go to details and say, okay, this one's not mapped to any layer. I can delete it. This one is mapped twice. I can delete it and say, oh, let me change the two colors of these, or you can change all the color of these to something else, right? So I'll just change these two, do a modify on selection, pick a color, change it to black. Like so. And you can change the colors of these layers that you want to bring into Planon, okay? All right, so I'm going to go back to drawing definition, hit the complete button here, and then now it let me complete this drawing definition. So everything is mapped okay. There's no duplicate mappings or anything like that. Okay. All right, so now once we're done with the drawing definition, we can then go to the import definition. In the import definition is where we import the actual drawing. So in the import definition, we have some settings here, but this is where the run action is, right? So we can import the drawings into Planon. Okay. I'll walk through the different fields here really quickly. I'll outline the more important fields that you need to update before you actually do an import. Okay. So in the import definition, we have a code and description. So that just has a code and description. If you are using a template, then you can maybe call this CAD import or something like that. If you are mapping every drawing individually because the layer naming is not consistent, right? That means in the drawing definition, let me go back here, take a step back. That means in the drawing definition, you're creating one drawing definition per floor plan. If you do that, then we would recommend putting maybe the property code underscore the floor code of that particular drawing maybe like the second floor. So this is, yeah, of that particular drawing into the code and to the description of that drawing definition. So you know which property and which floor this drawing definition belongs to, right? And then when you do create the import definitions as well, we recommend being consistent there and also having the like that, the property code and then also the floor code into the CAD import definition as well. And you will have one drawing definition and one import definition per floor plan. Okay, a one-to-one relationship there. Because if your drawing names were not consistent, then you have to make sure that you use the right drawing definition to import the right drawing itself, right? Okay. But if they were all consistent and you're using a template, then you can just create one drawing definition and reuse that. If you guys had like multiple team members that were importing different drawings, right? Then I would recommend using one import definition per team member so that you guys don't conflict with each other. Like if I'm trying to import something at this time and then Manaz is also trying to import another drawing at this time, we're going to conflict with each other and then somebody will win and somebody will lose, right? So one of the drawings won't get imported in. Okay. So if you do have multiple team members, we'll say I would recommend to have one drawing definition, one import definition per team member. So they use their own and you can import simultaneously. All right. For the import definition, we require code and description, right? And then the drawing definition itself. So this, if I click on this pick list, you'll see a list of all the different drawing definitions from the previous module. And then you see the training one that I just created, like so, right? So you can select that. Make sure we always have the right drawing definition selected when you import the drawing, okay? And then how do we retrieve the property and floor? We retrieve the property and floor from the drawing floor mapping. On the top here, on the top left, we have a mapping between drawing and floor selection step. If I click on this, this is where we define the drawing itself, the drawing name, and which property and floor it belongs to. Okay. And then for every drawing, you have to have a mapping here for each drawing. So this is for the second floor of Apple Tree, so it belongs to the Apple Tree Road property, and then the second floor. And if I were to have a third floor or something like that, I would just click on add here, put this in, and then the third floor drawing, say this was the drawing name, Apple Tree Road, this one here, and then floor 3, I can type it in, or maybe choose from the pick list, the third floor, and save. So you have to map here which drawing belongs to which property and which floor, okay? Let me go back to the import definition. So that's the property floor retrieval. And then effective on is the date on which date of the import definition itself. So this is the import definition. This is the date we define here, right? So the date is important. When you import the drawings into Planon, our space module is like a time-aware module, right? So you can import a drawing as of January 1st, 2024 of last year, right? And then if your floor plan changes, you can update the floor plan and then import it as of maybe August 1st, 2024 of last year. So between January and August, the floor plan looked like a certain way, right? And then in August, the floor plan changed, you did some reconstruction. Maybe you added some more spaces or broke some of the conference room down and created more spaces or something like that, right? Then you can import the changes as of August 1st, 2024. And then within the Planon application, you can then go into Planon, the space module, change the time of which you want to see, change the date of which you want to see the drawing for, the data for. And then you can do some time traveling within the Planon application, say, oh, back in January and February, the drawing looked like this. After August, the drawing looked like this. And maybe in like February 1st, 2025 of this year, you're doing some more reconstruction or something like that. The floor plan changes again, right? So you have that audit trail within the application, say, and see how the floor plan changed over time. So we can track that within the Planon application, right? And that's what this date is for. So make sure you update the date correctly when you import the actual drawing, okay? And then down below, are we importing spaces? Yes. Are we importing assets and persons from the AutoCAD drawing? No. Technically, we can, right? Typically, we don't. We data load asset and people because the data is always changing and stuff like that, right? So we don't. Our source of truth for these shouldn't be in the AutoCAD drawing, but only the space and the space polylines and the space numbers, right? And then are we importing workspaces? Yes. Yes or no. So if you do use workspaces, you can set this to yes. If you don't use workspaces, you can set this to no. If you don't use workspaces and you set it to yes, it's okay. If you don't have that layers mapped, it won't bring anything in. It won't affect anything. Okay. Here we're importing non-closed polylines. So Planon requires all the space polylines and the workspace polylines to be closed, right? If you, for example, forgot to close one or two or some of them, right? Planon will automatically close them when you import the drawing if you set this to yes. Okay? And then the log level detail, I always leave this as high. You can set it low, medium, high. I always leave it at high so you can track each of the datas. When you import the drawing, it will let you know, it will give you some error messages, you know, if something failed. But if the space went in correctly, it will give you like the space square footage or the space dimensions and everything. It will track all that stuff within the log. And typically if you see that, then you can see if it's correct or not or something like that, right? So I always leave this as high. Allow auto correction. So this is the feature that came in one of the releases where it auto scales the elements. If it's not on a scale of 1, it just auto scales it to 1 when it imports the drawing, so you don't have to fix it on the AutoCAD drawing. And I think in the later release, maybe L113 or something like that, or L114, it also fixes the 2D polylines, and it converts those into just polylines when it imports the drawing. Okay. And then here, it's just the location of the drawing itself. So in this case, we look at the web dev, right? If you're on a cloud, Planon Cloud instance, we look on the web dev folder, and then there should be a folder structure, and I'll show you that in a bit. But there should be a folder structure, and then here we're looking in the inbox for all the drawings that we want to import, right? And then we have a file wildcard filter here. So I always put in the file name of the drawing that you're going to import here, and we import a drawing at a time. You can do drawings in batches as well, saying say for example, if you wanted to do everything that belongs to this particular building, you just do that, put an asterisk, and it will look for everything with the file name that starts with this, and it'll import that in. Okay. And then start date and end date, these are more for batch importing if you want to schedule your imports and then import batch drawings or something like that, you can do that. Output location, this is going to go into the outbox. And then that's for the AutoCAD drawing, and this is for the ORJ, right? So when Planon imports the AutoCAD drawing, the DWG file, it makes a copy of that AutoCAD drawing, it puts it into the outbox folder, and it writes metadata back to that AutoCAD drawing. So the metadata links the space record in Planon to that space polyline in the AutoCAD drawing itself, and also for the workspace, writes metadata for the workspace polyline back to the AutoCAD drawing as well. So it creates that link from the Planon space record or the workspace record to the Planon space polyline or the workspace polyline. Okay. And then it also, when you import the drawing, it takes that DWG and it converts it into an ORJ, or what we call an ORJ file. And in the Planon application, when you view the floor plan, and I'll show you later how to view the floor plan within the Planon application. But when you view the floor plan, you're really looking at the ORJ file, and you're not looking at the AutoCAD drawing. So the ORJ file is a static image of the actual floor plan itself. Okay? All right. And then we have our output options tab where we can add the month and the dates and the file name and stuff like that. So we have some settings here on top. And this is really how we do our time traveling itself, right? So when you import a drawing, you can say, oh, add a month and a date, add a month output folder and a date output folder. So it creates that folder structure when you import the drawing. It uses, let me go back to the general tab, and it uses this date here. So in this case, I have it set to January 1st, 2025, right? So that means when I import this drawing and I have this set to yes, right? It's going to create a folder structure when I import. It's going to create a folder structure of 01/01/2025, I think, something like that. And then have the output, have the ORJs into that particular output folder. And then again, when you import the drawing as of February 1st, 2025, right, it will create that 01/02/2025 folder, subfolder, and then it will then put the output drawings there. So that's how we can do our time traveling, as this feature here creates our versioning for every time we import the drawing based on this date here that we specify. Okay, so it doesn't take the current dates, but it takes the dates that you specify here. So here you can specify the current date, but you can specify any date here, and it will use this date. Okay. Let me go back to the output options tab. Then we have options here to resume and end spaces, right? So say you imported a drawing and you had space 101, 102, and 103 on the drawing. And then later on you did some reconstruction and then 103 went away, right? So 103 was no longer on the drawing. When you import that drawing, if we say end space is checked to yes here, it will then end the space in Planon 103, end space 103 in Planon, using, let me go back to the general tab, back to the date again. So the date is very important. Using this date, it will use an end date of 1 day prior to this particular date that you specify here. Okay, so end space 103 with 1 date prior to this date. And then say later on you did some more reconstruction and in March, space 103 came back on the drawing, right? So when you import the drawing, and if you have this resume space set to yes, it's going to say, okay, space 103 is now back on the drawing. I'm going to resume that space in Planon. So space 103 will get a resume, will not be ended anymore. It will have a start date of, and then again, of this date that you specify, and then say, for example, this was in March 1st, 2025, something like that. So we'll have that as a start date or a resume date. Okay. So that's what these settings are. If they're not on the AutoCAD drawing, then we can end them. If they come back on the AutoCAD drawing, we can resume them if you have these settings set here. And then also down below for fixed workspaces, same thing here, ending and resuming the workspaces as well. Okay. And then we have like rent from rent to settings. These are for like contracts or something like that. And then to flexible workspaces, we don't really use this anymore within the application, as we can import fixed workspaces within the application, and then we can make them flexible using an action or something like that. So we can toggle between making them reservable or not within the application. So it's easier that way. Okay. We have our two other tabs here where we have a separator for floor and a character separator for the floor. These are more for if you didn't want to create a mapping between the drawing and floor here, so you didn't want to take the AutoCAD file name and then put it into and map it to the property in the code here, but your file names itself had the property code, the Planon property code, and a Planon floor code in the file name somewhere, right? We can define that using one of these two settings and say, okay, if the first section before the first underscore is the property code, we can take that as the property code. And then if the last section after the last underscore is the floor code, then we can take that as a floor. So it reads the file name and distinguish which or determine which property and floor it should go into. Okay? So that's what these two sections are. Okay? All right. So how to create a drawing definition itself. Typically during implementation, the consultants would create one for you, right? So I would never create one from scratch. If I were a customer, I would never need to create one from scratch. You would always have one there. And if you needed to create another one, I would say copy an existing one and then modify it, right? So if you were doing one per floor plan, one per floor, or if you were doing one for another team member or something like that, right? You would just copy an existing one, change the code and description, make sure you have the right drawing definition mapped. So in this case, I'm going to map it to the training one that we just created, right? Make sure you have the right date specified, and then make sure you have the right drawing specified, and then you're good to go, okay? And then when you do updates to the drawings, the only thing you really need to know is, or the only things that you need to keep in mind are you're using the right drawing definition, the right import definition that's mapped to the right drawing definition. You have the right date set, and then you have the right file name set here. And then that's all you need to keep in mind. And then you can just run it. Everything, all the other settings should be static. You shouldn't really need to change those settings as you import. Okay, so make sure you have the right import definition. Make sure it's mapped to the right drawing definition. Make sure you set your date correctly. So initial import can be January 1st, 2024 of last year, something like that. And then going forward, when you make changes, you want to make sure you set the right dates here. Say if you did some renovations and in like August of 2024, you would set the date here. And then you would import the drawing, right? And then you update this file and say, okay, this is the drawing that I want to import, and you can run that. Okay. Okay, so to import a drawing, first I would need to say the mapping between drawing is there, right? So in this case, I'm doing this particular drawing here, and then it's going to this particular building and this particular floor. So if I look in spaces and workspaces, I look at that building, go to the filters tab. Under floors, I only have a ground floor. I don't have a second floor, right? Let me go back to my import definition. So I have this particular file name, this mapped to this property to the second floor. If I go to the import definition, I'll import it as of August 1st, sure. Say that's the initial import, right? In my wildcard, I have it set to this particular file name already. And then I'm using the drawing definition that I created earlier that was mapping all of these layers, okay? Now you need to upload the drawing into the WebDAV first. And we typically use a tool called WinSCP. WinSCP is a free SFTP software that you can download and install on your machine. And then what you would need to do is you would need to get the credentials to map to this particular environment. And then you have a username and password here. And it's a WebDAV, right? So it's always a port 443 protocol or port number. The WebDAV protocol is always using port 443, right? So once you have that mapped, you can log into it. And then once you log in, so in WinSCP, the right-hand side is usually the WebDAV folder structure, and the left-hand side is usually my machine. So this is my local machine itself, okay? And in this case, I would say, for drawings that I want to import into Planon, right, I would put it in the inbox. So I'll go into the CAD inbox folder, and then you can structure the folder structure however you guys like, so that it makes sense for you to maintain, right? You can put everything in the inbox and then import the drawing from there. In this case, I have a subfolder for each building, right? In the inbox that I'm importing drawings for, right? So I can go into like the apple tree building, and then I can update my drawings there. Or if I go to like the Columbus Square building, I see my different drawings there for that particular building, something like that, right? So you guys can structure the inbox however you guys like that makes sense for you. And I have this AutoCAD drawing uploaded. If I didn't have it uploaded, I can always just drag and drop from the left on my machine. So I can browse to my machine, and then where the drawing is, drag and drop this into this folder here. I'm going to say cancel, but you can always overwrite, right? So you can drag and drop from your machine into the web dev, into the cloud itself. Okay. So that's there. And then when I import the drawing, so let me go back here. So the drawing is uploaded. It's in the inbox, in one of the subfolders in the inbox. And in this case, I have include subfolders set to yes, so it looks at the subfolders itself and looks for this particular file name and then imports that, okay? And I would say, as of August 1st, 2024, I can say run CAD import. So when I say run, it's going to run here, and you can see the spinning circle. And smaller drawings go a little faster. Bigger drawings might take a little bit longer, right? As it imports, okay? Once it's done, the spinning circle goes away. I can always check the logs from there, right? So I can go to the import logs. We always have a verification, and then we have the actual import itself. The verification gives us some information. Oh, sorry. If I select the verification, go to the log details, it gives us some information on the AutoCAD drawing itself, right? So there's some warnings here where it found like unsupported entities on these layers or something like that. It gives you the handle ID, the AutoCAD handle ID, right? So you can always use an AutoCAD command to find that particular element or polyline or something, right? And then it gives you some other information here. If there were like overlapping polylines, like space polylines that cross over to each other, right? Or workspace polylines that cross over each other, or like duplicate polylines for a space, or duplicate space numbers or something like that, you would see that in the verification log as well. Then you can go fix your drawing, update it, and then go back to WinSCP, upload the drawing again, right? Upload it back to the inbox, and then run the CAD import again. Okay. So you have a verification log, and then if I go back here, I have an import log itself where I can see here the import itself. So I can see here for initial import, it created a floor record, right? So it created one floor. In this case, it took this drawing from the inbox Apple Tree folder, this file name. It imported it into this particular property, imported into this floor, and it created this floor record. And if I scroll down, it created 45 spaces. And these are the spaces that it created. So the code, the space code, and then the AutoCAD handle ID, and then what it did, right? And then here you see like the dates for each of the spaces, and then the square footage of each of the spaces, right? And then if I scroll down, this is all the spaces. Here, I see workspaces. So it created some workspaces, 72 workspaces. Created these particular workspace numbers. This is the AutoCAD handle ID for each of these. And they created those. And then you have your workspace area as well, right? The square footage of the workspaces. And then if I scroll down to the bottom here, it didn't end any spaces because this was the initial import, right? So no spaces were ended. It created in the outbox folder, so output in the CAD outbox folder, and it created this folder structure with this date of, oh, I was backwards, 2024 0801. So for August 1st, 2024, it create, and then it put this AutoCAD drawing into this outbox folder. And it also created this ORJ file, what we view in Planon, how we view the floor plan in Planon, right? And then it tells you how many elements it imported as well. So the total element count was 11,500, something like that, right? So if it did exceed 15,000, you'll see like a warning here that says, oh, it exceeded 15,000 elements. There might be some performance impacts or something like that. Okay. If I go to WinSCP, go back here, I can go back to my outbox. So if I look at the outbox folder, where it's, how do I get this? Like this, maybe? Here we go. Where it created that output file, right? If I go to the Outbox folder, and then the Apple Tree subfolder, and then I see my 2024-0801, my August 1st, 2024 subfolder. Again, it takes the date of the import definition that you created here, right? It takes this date to create that subfolder. And then go back all the way down here. And then in that 2024-0801, I see a copy of the DWG where it writes the metadata back to it, and also my ORJ files where which is what that Planon application uses to view the floor plan itself. Okay? So all of this in the outbox folder. If I imported this drawing again as of a different date, it will create another subfolder, and then there it creates my different versionings. Okay? Now, once I've imported the drawing, this icon usually means there's a warning, right? So there's a warning here, and it says check the verification log. If I go back to the verification log, it gives me this particular warning here where there's unsupported entities that are not supported or something like that. And here's the handle IDs, right? But you can always view the floor plan within the Planon application too. So if I go to space and the workspaces now, go back to the properties tab, select that particular building, go to floors. Now I see my second floor. The second floor was created from the CAD import itself, right? As of the date that was specified, so August 1st, 2024, that date was specified in the CAD import itself. And then here's my initial drawing that I imported. And then these are the output folders for the DWG and the ORJ files here, right? If I select that floor, go to Spaces tab. Here I see all my spaces that were created. And again, it captures all the square footage. And if I click on this icon on the top right where it says CAD Integrator, then I can view the floor plan itself in Planon, right? And usually I would say select all, make sure everything is highlighted and nothing is not highlighted. Then I know that all the spaces came through. If there were some errors in the CAD import itself, right? And you came here and you selected all and you see like, oh, some of the spaces were not highlighted, something like that, right? So you can say, oh, it helps you identify the areas with the issues, and you can focus on those polylines. Maybe there was duplicate polylines, or maybe the space number insertion point or the grip point was outside of that space polyline. So it didn't bring that space in or something like that, right? So it helps you identify where the issues are. And then if you select all and go to the Workspaces tab, under the Workspaces selection step here you see all the different workspaces that were created as well. And you can see they all have a start date of August 1st, 2024, right? If I view the floor plan again, so on the top right, click on the CAD Integrator icon, and then I can here select all again. And then I would see all my workspaces highlighted as well. Let me size this down a little bit. See all my workspaces highlighted as well. And then if some were not highlighted, right, then that also helps you identify the issues. Maybe in the import log, it gave you some errors saying, oh, this workspace will not be able to import because maybe there was no space number or duplicate space polylines or duplicate workspace numbers or something like that, right? Then it helps you identify it here too. Okay. And then here in the CAD integrator, you can always say show construction data. And then that gives you like the doors, the walls, the stairs, and so forth, right? So it helps you identify, and then some of the furniture. Let me zoom in a little bit. You see some of the furniture and stuff like that, right? So it helps you identify the space. And you can see the different colors on the floor plan, and these were identified in the drawing definition itself, right? So you can take the AutoCAD colors, or you can define the color yourself. Okay? But here in the spaces and workspaces, you can view the floor plan, and if there were issues with the import, you can see that here and hopefully help you isolate where the issue was. Okay, and then you can fix it in the AutoCAD drawing. Once you adjust the AutoCAD drawing, you can go back here, upload the drawing again into the inbox. So let me go back to the inbox, upload the updated drawing into the inbox. and you would come back here into the import definition and then import the drawing again. Okay. Okay. I think that's good. Let me go back here. So we've touched on the drawing definition. So how to create a drawing definition if you were using a template itself, how to upload into WinSCP, and then creating templates, creating the floor mappings, and then mapping the space polylines, mapping the workspace polylines, mapping the construction data, and then in the import definition itself, right, doing the mapping between the drawing and the floor, the property and the floor, creating the import definition. So things to keep in mind is the drawing definition you're using, the date that you're going to import it for, and then the file itself, the file name for the wildcard that you're importing for, right? Then once you've imported, you can go to Spaces and Workspace TSI and view the floor plan itself, right? So select the property, go to filter, select the floor, go to Spaces, view the floor plan, and then go to Workspaces if you guys are using Workspaces, and then view the floor plan there as well. Make sure everything came in correctly. And then you can isolate it there. And if there are any issues, you can go back to the AutoCAD drawing, make your updates, upload and re-import, and then check again in Space and Workspace to make sure everything came in correctly. Okay. Typically, our lessons learned for the floor plan is we have to make sure that the data effective that you import using the data effective in the CAD import definition. And sometimes when you import an initial import, so you're importing a drawing new, right? And you have space 101, 102, 103 on the drawing, but then you say, oh, there's a mistake in the drawing and space 103 shouldn't be there. Then you import the drawing, it creates 101, 102, 103, and you say, okay, space 101, space 103 is incorrect. I'm going to take it out, and I'll import it again. It'll give you an error message. It'll say, oh, I'm trying to end space 103 with a date prior to the dates specified in the CAD import and as a date effective. If you're using the same date, so the start date is, say, for example, January 1st, 2025, and that's your initial import, that's when the space was created, and you're trying to end it as of December 31st, 2024, it's not possible to give you an error message saying, oh, it can't end the space prior to the start date, something like that. So that means it has a start date of January 1st, 2025 of this year, and you're trying to end it as of December 31st of last year, something like that. So that's not possible. So if it's a correction, I would say delete that space record in Planon so it's not there. So you won't see any mistakes that were in there, right? But if it's an actual change, then you would import it as of a future date of the actual initial date, so it tracks the changes itself. Okay, so if it's a mistake or something like that, I would say delete those records because they shouldn't be there. But if it's actual valid change, and you do want to track it, right? Then your date of which the date effective that you specify there needs to be future date of the actual import dates. So you always need to import as of a later date. Okay. Also, will give you those error messages and stuff like that. Okay. One thing we do keep in mind is that we noticed that when we import the drawings in the AutoCAD, it writes metadata back to the polylines, right? So if, say, you had a polyline for space 101, and then you did some reconstruction, and then that space is now called 106, something like that, right? If you use that same polyline and you don't use a different polyline, that same polyline has metadata still connected to space 101 in Planon. So it might cause some conflict or something like that. Or it will update the incorrect record within the Planon application unintentionally, right? So when you do introduce new spaces or new workspaces, we recommend redrawing those polylines and deleting the polylines that are no longer there. This way you remove the metadata, so there's no link between the polyline and Planon application to any of the space or workspace records, right? So then it creates the new records without issues. Okay. So we recommend deleting the old polylines that are no longer there, redrawing new polylines for new space numbers. So you don't reuse any of the same polylines. Okay. Because there's metadata linked to it, so we don't want issues there. Okay. Yeah, so this is outlining that you should create new polylines for the spaces and the workspaces if there are new spaces and new workspaces introduced, right? Okay. Make sure that the polylines don't cross over each other. And sometimes when we snap on top of each other, there might be like a slight crossover or an overlap that we don't see. You have to like zoom way in to actually see it or something like that. And I've seen those in some cases where if the actual polyline wasn't like a straight line up and down or across, but the space itself was at some kind of angle or something like that, the space polylines could cross over to each other ever so slightly at some corner or something like that, and that causes an issue too. So we have to keep that in mind. Make sure we check to make sure there's no crossing over of the polylines. Okay. Ensure that the space and the workspace numbers, insertion and grip points are within the space polyline. So for like the text or the blocks, right? You might have multiple insertion point and grip points for that text or block, right? We have to make sure all those insertion points or grip points are within the space polyline. Sometimes it's like ever so slightly outside, even though the text itself is within the space polyline or the workspace polyline, but the insertion point is a little bit outside of it, right? It will then, think it's like the next space over or cause issues with that space or something like that, right? So we have to keep that in mind though. Even though the text itself is within, the insertion point and the grip points need to be within as well. So we have to check that. Okay? And then when ending a space or workspace within the Planon application, right, there could be some related data to that space or workspace, like maybe reservation records or open orders or occupancy assignments or something like that, people still sitting in that space or workspace, right? So then those need to be updated first. The reservations need to be canceled first. The work orders should be canceled first before you end those space or workspaces. Okay. And these could be the different error messages within the log file as well that you see there. Okay. So these are the typical issues that we see when importing drawings, and then as we see errors in the logs and stuff like that. I'm sure everyone that has imported a drawing has come across at least one of these issues, right? All right. Okay. Some CAD improvements that we did that's available in at least L114, the latest, right? So it might not be available yet in the release that you are on, but once you upgrade to the latest, you'll have all of these there as well. Okay. So now we can configuration transfer the CAD drawing definition and the CAD import definitions. Before, we had to recreate everything, the drawing definition, and recreate the import definitions as we promote up the stack, right? Now we can use the configuration transfer tool to transfer those up the stack so that we don't have to recreate them manually, especially the drawing definition, right? Because that could be time consuming if you're not using a template, but if you're mapping each drawing individually, right? So that's very helpful. And then again, we don't support 2D polylines, so sometimes a 2D polyline looks just like a polyline, right? You have to actually select that polyline in AutoCAD, and then you see in the properties, oh, it's a 2D polyline. then those 2D polylines don't get imported into the Planon application, right? Now with the latest release, you have that auto correction. If you have that auto correction enabled, it will automatically convert those 2D polylines to regular polylines and bring them into Planon. So we don't have to update them manually anymore in the latest one. Okay. So that's helpful as well, because usually these are like hard to find which one is a 2D, which one is an actual polyline and stuff. You have to select each one to find out. Right. In the CAD import verification itself, it will auto scale the block to 1 if they're not set to 1, so that auto correction will do that as well. For block references with non-unity scales, Planon doesn't support block reference with a scale other than 1. It will be in the verification log, but if you have auto correction set to allow to yes, these will be automatically scaled to 1 when they actually do the import, so you don't have to go into AutoCAD and update them. Okay. And then the wildcard for the XREFs, right? Remember the layers with the asterisk next to them, right? So those are the wildcards for the XREF drawings. We can now bring those XREF drawings in. Before, I think we either recommended the customer to copy the XREF onto the actual drawing itself, so that you don't get that file name prefix in that layer, right? So then it makes it more global, right? The layer more consistent with the other drawings. But now you can use that asterisk, the wildcard asterisk in the layers to map those XREF layers, okay? So you don't have to do that. And then to see our updated release notes, you can always go to the Planon application. Let me minimize this. The Planon application. On the top, under the question mark, you can always select the question mark. You have your web help here. If you click on the web help, it brings you to our web help here. You can always search in the web help for anything like a CAD import or something like that, right? And then it brings up, it's like the Planon Google search, something like that, right? So you could bring the CAD import features up here as well. If I go to the home page of the web help, right, you get our supported configurations. So if I select that, what's supported, right? So the supported configurations, and then you can see AutoCAD in the CAD import, which versions of AutoCAD we support, and it's always going to be the full version. Technically, we don't support AutoCAD Lite or some other version, right? Sometimes those work still, but we only test in the full versions. Okay, so currently, as of our release 107, we support up to AutoCAD 2025. Okay, and so you can see here the supported versions. If I go back to my web help here, and you can see there's the release notes. If you select this, open up a new tab, and then here are the release notes that we have for our entire application. You can filter on, with what's within the between 100 and 113, what came out as new, and then you can always filter down on CAD import as well. So these are the new CAD imports enhancements that came out since L100, something like that. And it here tells you the version that it came out in, and if it's something that you that helps you or helps you improve the import feature, you'll know which release you have to upgrade to get that particular feature. Okay. And I think that covers it. So now I think we're open to questions or Manaz.
Here's a question in the chat.
Oh, the question in the chat. For text, you can reuse the text. Yep. So the text you can reuse as long as you update the number itself, then that's fine. So as long as it's not the same As long as it's not the same number, that should be fine. Yep.
I don't know if this is the right way to do it. I just raised my hand.
Yeah.
I just want to verify again. So when you're getting ready to delete, like renovate, and for example, I'm getting ready to delete like 55 plus workspaces, the best practice will be to go to the CAD and delete everything, right? Delete the polylines, as you say, because there's a data link still to it. Put the
Correct.
new
Yep.
numbers and all of that, right?
Correct.
Two questions. The first one is, of course, we have to make sure there's no reservations and all of that stuff. What about neighborhood? Do we have to clear the neighborhood out, or that doesn't matter? If the space is assigned to a neighborhood, not people, but neighborhood.
Yeah, so that's the occupancy itself. So those occupancies should be ended as well. So the neighborhood, when you link a neighborhood to a space, it creates an occupancy record.
Oh, okay.
And
even though it's not
that
people,
occupancy-
I guess when I think about occupancy is when you assign. Obviously,
no,
everybody's in Agile now, so
correct. Yeah, no, occupancy is only for people. That's correct. So no, you don't have to unlink the neighborhood.
okay. So you can, so when you delete that record, like space 101, the neighborhoods is gonna delete. It goes with that record, right?
Yeah, it won't delete. So you'll delete it in AutoCAD, and then you'll do your reconstruction, right? But when you import the drawing, it will end that space. So it won't delete it. It will end the space as of a specific date that you specify, right? Then you can always go back and view that data. So you can always say, oh, the space used belongs to neighborhood A or something like that. So you can always view that data. It won't delete it in Planon. It will just end it.
Okay, so you delete the polyline, and then you did mention something. If I don't really change off the end date, it automatically, every time you delete a space or workspace, it will put the day before, right? The end date. When
The
you
day
set
before,
your effective date,
correct.
right?
Here
When you,
in the correct in the import definition.
yeah,
The day
the
before this
effective
particular
on,
date. Yes.
yeah, the date on which changes become, let's say if I delete it today, I go to my drawings and delete those 50 plus something workstation. Those 50 plus workstation will automatically have an end date the day before today,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. The day before this date specified. So it'll be
Yeah, let's say I've
July
specified today.
31st. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, let's use that. August
Yeah.
1st. It will have the end date. So when I try to run the import definition, it's going to have that errors, right? But you can't have your record, your end date
Prior to the start
prior
date.
to,
Correct.
right?
Yeah. So you have to
But
specify a future date here.
Okay.
Like a date after this one. So if your initial import was August 1st, right? And you made some renovations, you deleted that section of the floor plan where it had like the 55 workspaces, right? And that renovation happened in January of 2025, let's say. It just happened recently. And so
Well,
you would
usually,
specify a date here.
yeah, we usually make the changes the same times. Like I would make the changes and
Yeah. And you
okay.
can always use today's date or something like that. And then you can import it. And it would end those 55 workspaces for that section of the floor plan as of January 21st, 2025. So one day prior to today. Yeah.
Okay. But in order for me to see it, you have to change the date on which changes become effective, the 21st, right?
No,
So
so you
that way
can
it'll
use, if you use today, it will end it one day prior to this date that you specify here. So if you
Okay.
specify January 22nd here, it will end it, it will use an
The
ending of January
21st.
21st. Yeah, one day prior to this date.
But if I do the import definition, will it gives me the errors that you can't import record that the end date start
Yeah, as long
the
as
end
the
date.
start date is not, as long as the end date is after the start date, it should be fine.
Okay.
So as long as January 21st, 2025 is after the start date of those spaces, then that's fine.
So you have to manipulate that.
You have to update this date when you import.
Okay,
So this
okay.
date should always reflect the actual changes, the date of the actual changes, or close to the date of actual changes.
Okay. And then one last thing, just really just a confirmations on the drawing definitions. Remember that when you're constructing the layers definitions for the constructions,
Yeah.
You see all that check mark,
Yes.
and you're saying that that's the one that is an active layers. When you say
Correct.
active, meaning it's on and unfrozen, right? Both. Like in the
I think
CAD.
so. I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Try it out. It's one. I think it's both. I think it's both, but it could be just one. I don't remember which one.
Yeah,
it is.
just wait. Okay, I don't. Yeah, I'm not sure whether it's actually the on that determined the check, or is it both on and unfrozen. You know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I think you have to try it out. I'm not
Okay.
sure on that one. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
All right. I think Albert, you had a question.
Hello, yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, first of all, my first question is about the auto correction. It talks about scaling any of the blocks being corrected to a scale of 1-to-1, correct?
Scales it back to 1. Yes.
Okay, now, one thing that we have is we use a block for our room, um, our room tags.
Uh-huh.
And remember you mentioned earlier that if your room information is not within the polylines of the space, then you wind up in an error message. So what
Right.
we are having to do is scale our block down to fit within the space in some of these areas.
You're resizing the block, right?
We are scaling the block down so that
Okay.
it fits within the space. However, on the rest of the drawing, that may not be needed.
Yeah. So
Are we gonna have to
so
go back and rescale all of this, the entire block for all the spaces to 1-to-1?
no,
Or
so
one or two
for
small spaces?
the space numbers, right? You scale the block down so you can fit the insertion point and the grip points. That's okay. Planon doesn't bring the block where it houses the space information into Planon. It just uses that to read the space number. It doesn't bring that block in. So you can scale that down, or you can scale that to whatever you need to fit the insertion points and the grip points. It's only for like the elements, like the construction data, like the furniture or like the doors and stuff like that. The layers that you do want to bring in and show in Planon, it'll just scale those to 1 and then bring those in. It won't change the visualization of the floor plan itself.
Okay, but it does give us a warning.
It does give you the warning, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it
So
lets you
that-
know that it's gonna update it. It's gonna update these scales. It lets you know that, but it doesn't change the visualization of the floor plan itself.
Okay, but we can turn that off.
You can, yes. Yeah, you can turn that off. Yeah.
And that won't affect anything else as far as data that's being brought in.
Mm, If you turn it
simply
off-
turned it off.
If you turn it off, then you have to make sure that all the blocks or all the elements are scaled to 1, excluding the space number blocks, right? And you have to make sure that all the polylines or the elements are not 2D polylines. They're on regular polylines. Yeah.
Correct. Okay. Yeah. That we're doing already.
Okay.
So
Okay.
this is just something for us to look at. We're having another issue related to the area lines. We're getting a min-max error. And I guess we're guessing that there is a minimum square footage that Planon accepts.
Possibly. I'm
But we
not
don't know
too
what that number
sure
is.
on that. I think that one will have to go to support. I'm not too sure on that one. It could be a number of different reasons.
Okay, that was just something that we've been, noticing
Yep.
on our end.
Yep.
And I think that's what I got for now.
Cool.
Thank you.
Melissa, you had a question?
Hi, yes, and thank you for doing the training over again. It's always nice to have a refresher. Mine's more from a graphic standpoint, especially when you're setting up the import definitions. One, will we ever be able to assign a line type to some of our construction data layers that we're bringing in? Particularly like life safety layers. Sometimes it's nice to see the 1 hour and 2 hour lines around something. And, we can bring those in and we can give it a color, but we really don't have a way to give it a thickness to stand at or the line type that comes in with it. So that's one question I have. And then, or maybe you can take back. The other thing is we have a lot of departments across our portfolio. And a lot of times the departments, although we will set them up like individuals so that the colors are different when we're making that PDF, but it would be nice sometimes if we could actually turn the layer or the outline of the departments, like to have more options. So like if we have cyan departments on the graphic a lot, that we also could have like a different color around them, because sometimes we'll pull in things like we have different, it's being charged to, we're hospital based, so some things will be charged hospital, office, and research. And so it's nice to kind of see that delineation, but it will have the same department code.
Yeah,
You know
yeah,
what I
yeah,
mean? So we're
yeah.
we're kind of it's more or less of a, from the graphic standpoint, like we can do it in the Excel spreadsheets and make it all understandable in the spreadsheets, but like from the graphic standpoint.
Yeah. I see that we have the hatching capability in
Yeah,
like
but
the
there's
space type.
yeah, so the hatching capability is nice and it did give us more options. But some of those hatches, once you use them a little bit, they start, like some of them aren't real good. You know what I mean? Like they're real blown out and they're kind of big. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so a lot of times like you're using only 3 or 4 different hatches, and then and even if you could do the hatch in a different color as well too. Like if we could just have like either like if we could have an option for an outline there, or um to change the hatch color maybe as well too, just to kind of give a little bit more options.
Yeah. I would say let's submit a support enhancement request to the support team.
Okay.
And I think our development team can probably review that and build those in. Then everyone can have those and be able to use those.
Okay. And then the line types, like I said, or the like a line type or line thickness when we're making the construction data
Yeah.
also.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Melissa. Albert, I think you have another question.
Yes, yes, very quickly. Negative spaces such as atriums, things of that nature. How do we set that up so that they are not counted within the square footage?
You either don't polyline them, or you categorize them differently with the space type and the space categories, so that you can exclude them using a filter when you run reports against the square footage.
Okay, so in actuality, don't put a polygon in.
If you don't polyline them, they won't be a space in Planon, and that could mean that you can't like create work orders against them or something like that, right? So if you do want to create
Correct.
work order against them, like atriums and hallways and lobbies and stuff, right? Then you do want to polyline them, and then you can categorize them differently using the space type or space category, and then you can say, oh, these exclude those vertical penetrations, atriums, certain areas when you run your reports against the square footage.
Okay, so that would be on the reports
Yeah.
side of
Yeah,
things.
so you would
Not-
filter first, you would filter them out, and then you can run the reports. Yeah.
Okay, I was thinking that you could have a designated layer for negative spaces and Planon can automatically exclude those from the square footage.
Yeah, we use space types or space categories to categorize those, and then that's how we can exclude them.
Okay.
What
so
what
the
is the space?
categorical issue.
What is the space category that is deducted in Planon?
It's however you like to define it. So you can create a space type called atrium, right? And then when you look up spaces and you say, okay, only give me space types that I want to count the square footage for, right? You can say, okay, just give me offices and workspaces and stuff like that, and exclude everything else, like the corridors or the elevators and stuff. And then they would filter down on those spaces, only those spaces, and you can run the reports against those spaces that you want to capture the square footage for. So that's how you would do it. And then you can always do it the other way around too. We say, oh, show me all the square footage for my atrium, vertical penetration, hallways, elevators, and stairs, or something like that. See how much that holds. Yeah. So it would be categorizing the actual space, and then you can filter them out when you run certain reports.
Okay. It's a category, and invite filter. Excellent. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Iwa, you had a question?
Yes, thank you. Correct me, please, if I'm wrong, but regarding space numbering, is the maximum character in space number is 15?
Correct. Yes, 15 characters.
Okay, and next question, is it possible to extend the maximum space numbering from the mentioned 15? Because I'm asking due to the operating at a higher limit of characters for many, many years in my client corporation, and in combination with the workplace reservation system plus on site, I mean room marking, like, stickers, plates. Shorter space numbering means not only the need to change the numbering methodology, but also the additional cost associated with the changing the marking on site.
Yep, I understand that. You can always submit an enhancement request. I think a couple of customers already have done that as well. But this is something our development team needs to adjust because it's hard coded into the database, right? So I would say submit an enhancement request, and then we can go from there to the support team. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right. I don't see anyone else with their hands up. Maybe do we have anyone else have questions? Feel free to unmute and ask away. Cool.
Oh, thank you so much, Nelson. Appreciate it. Again, I'll follow up with a link to the site where you can access the recording of the training and the help guide. But thanks everyone for taking the time, and appreciate it again, Nelson.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Nelson. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.